Just call me, D.
Virginia sits at the top of the South and the bottom of the North. So for a long time, we didn't have our own identity. We've heard stories from Baltimore, Atlanta, DC. The list goes on. Most of our city's history is lost in graveyards or locked away in a prison. So I don't tell you these stories to glorify the street life or the criminal element. I want the youth of the day to understand who their fathers were, their mothers' fathers were, and we today are descendants of those stories. So if you're a Richmond native, this is what you come from. But there's a time in history where the streets was saw as the only way out for us, to us, especially when something has kept you fed, protected, warm, and alive, because we all have an instinct to survive. And during these times, everything was about survival. Richmond at War, 1990s.
This ain't the 60s, it's the 90s, baby. It's the 90s.
Born and raised in Richmond, VA, we have a man named Daniel Bowler. Daniel went by the nickname Brick, which comes from his love of lifting weights. It's unclear when this nickname came about, but that's what the streets knew him as from then on out. During his younger years, he was a normal kid. He had grown up in a Christian home with his mother and father and his only sibling sister, Haley. They would attend church every Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday, and to the children it seemed like they were in church almost all the time. Now his father was a contractor and his mother worked as a supply supervisor at MCV, which is now known today as VCU Medical Center. It was at the young age of 4 years old when his parents started sending him to see a psychiatrist. Nothing the family thought they couldn't handle, but they were soon met with a far greater problem than expected. As he got older, Daniel would get into trouble more than your average growing boy. He couldn't focus in school, he skipped classes, and even ran away. But then he would begin stealing. And at first, it was minor things such as cheese, hair gel, but then he graduated to cars. And Daniel was always the type of person to say, I do the best I can, but it's never good enough. Having a sense that the people around him only saw him as a screw-up or a problem child. So one fateful day as a young boy, after stealing someone's vehicle, he get into a serious car crash, throwing him head first through a windshield, leaving him with a large forehead scar shaped like a ballet dancer. And this head injury will ultimately change his personality. It's said that he began to act less connected to the world, withdrawn and quiet most days. Now it isn't clear if he was made to see a doctor on a regular or even sought out some sort of therapy after family, friends noticed his change in behavior. It was most likely brushed off as it was early on in life. But his father would come to a breaking point. Daniel was arrested one Christmas Eve, so locking himself in a room all night, his father cried over and over for his son, and the arrests would just keep coming. By the time he would see age 15, it's the year 1994, and Daniel had already racked up a multitude of charges ranging from assault and battery, robbery, use of a firearm, and obstruction of justice, all within a couple of years. Now his underage crime binge came to an end when he decided to commit robbery of a store owned by a Korean man named Jung Do. Jung had just opened for business the year before and was already put in a life or death situation with a gun in his face. But Daniel wouldn't completely get away with it, because not long after, Daniel was caught and Jung Do would end up testifying against him in court, throwing the last nail in the coffin for Daniel. And he'd ultimately have to spend a few years behind them walls for it. So him now being 18 years old in the year 1997 and still doing his time in a juvenile detention center, Daniel gets into an altercation with one of the guards. But this altercation would pass the point of a few hands thrown, and he ends up badly wounding the correctional officer. Another guard had to restrain Daniel after the attack, and upon his trip back to court, he tacks on a new charge, being found guilty of felony malicious wounding. He was sentenced to 20 years with 14 years suspended. So with the time he was currently doing, it equals out to him ultimately doing juvenile life. And he wouldn't see the streets of Richmond until the year 2000 at 21 years old. Now from years 2000 to 2002, Daniel managed to stay under the radar, at least from police and newspapers. But by the following year, in 2003, he'd found himself arrested at Riverside Regional Jail for violating his probation after eluding the police. But the worst was yet to come, as his mother Joyce would pass away while he was behind bars, after his mother had a brief fight with bone cancer, and she hadn't told her son how sick she was. They allowed him to be released just long enough to view the body, an image etched in his memory forever. Her entire appearance had changed, with chemotherapy causing her hair loss and surgeons having to remove one of her eyes to remove a tumor behind it. And afterward, the natural cycle of death had swollen her face. And this sight completely freaked her son out. And Daniel would replay the same statement over and over to his family that absolutely can't be their mother. He couldn't grasp the cold fact that his mother was gone. He would even deny she was actually dead for a long time after that. And eventually, he'd go off the deep end. He was definitely hearing voices before, but now his psychosis would truly escalate. The delusions would begin. And here is where they would diagnose Daniel as psychotic. Correctional officers will often see Daniel laughing out loud uncontrollably, telling people he was the devil and that he was immortal. And sometime during this incarceration, he fashioned devil horns out of his own feces and smeared himself with it as well. The jail's medical staff would prescribe Daniel Halidol, which is an antipsychotic medication. The medication helped out a good amount, but it ran out after a while. So his bid would end by February 2005, and Daniel had officially served all his time. So they would send him on his way with a couple of weeks of supply of Halidol. But that was it. No reoccurring supply. Once it ran out, he was to fend for himself. And he made attempt after attempt to get more of the antipsychotic medication, but no dice. So Daniel started to self-medicate with the drug ecstasy. So if you coupled that with his ongoing mental issues, it was a recipe for self-destruction. He planned on moving back with his father and sister, telling himself, and I quote, "I've got to get on my feet the right way this time." And his family would say that they could see the good that was still left inside him. His sister Haley would try her best to help him with getting more of the antipsychotic medication. He didn't have the mind for the paperwork and the appointments needed to get free mental health care. So she gives him a ride to go see a social worker in Chesterfield County. But all he got was food stamps. And it had to be crushing to know that no one wanted to lend a hand in helping her brother, because Haley herself had her own life. Her own children are raised in the midst of all this. So now that Daniel had no way of receiving his meds, after a while of not having it, the psychosis would fully return, prompting him to tattoo the words, "When mama comes back, then I'll chill," on the left side of his neck, while also tattooing his face in the process. Daniel really did feel like someone was hiding his mother, no matter what anyone told him. So as Daniel's mental condition worsened, he moved out of the family home. And for the next couple of months, Daniel had become a regular, hanging out at the strip mall on Broad Rock Boulevard. Several of the locals would always see him walking around up and down the street, hustling all day. It's said that as long as he's properly medicated, he's actually a pretty docile person. But at this point, it's been several months since his last dose. Ecstasy would make Daniel's delusions even stronger, taking as many as 8 pills at a time, descending deeper and deeper into a reality that he thought was all the more real than the life we're all living here and now, reaching a point where everyone, including himself, was sort of locked inside of a movie set. Paranoid as ever, he proclaimed himself the Terminator, and as of now, he was basically living on the street as a ticking time bomb that would explode on the day of June 1st, 2005. Daniel is 26 years old by now, and at the break of dawn, just before 7 a.m., he would ride around with his weapon, searching for a man who allegedly owed him money for drugs in the Hillside housing projects located in the south side of Richmond, Virginia. And he'd walk the courtyards of this community until bumping into a man named Derek Connor, aka 2, on the 1600 block of Glenfield Avenue, a 29-year-old black man who was allegedly an acquaintance of Daniel's, but wasn't the actual person he was looking for. So during this unexpected meet and greet, the both men would get into an argument over the money that Derek supposedly owed. It said Derek had just defused the altercation just minutes before bumping into Daniel. Connor was trying to stop another man from being shot, telling the man, and I quote, "It's a nice day today. Let's try to have a nice day." So the odds of someone having a problem with him right after was definitely unexpected. So after several minutes of Daniel and Derek going back and forth with one another, Daniel says, "I'll be right back." He then calmly walked over to that Lincoln Continental he owned to retrieve a black semi-automatic handgun. And as before, he calmly walked back toward Derek, put the gun to his head, and pulled the trigger. Now, some articles say that Daniel shot Derek outside the apartment complex, and others say he was found inside one of the apartments. But only the eyewitnesses who were there really know the truth. But what truth that I can provide about Derek is that he was raised in a church, even sang in the church choir and attended a crusade for Christ Christian Church Ministries. He grew up in Southside with a single mother and was the eldest of 2 sisters and 2 brothers. Derek had many roles to fill, always looking out for his younger siblings, making sure they stayed on track. And Derek's death for them would more than hurt, because other than being an older brother, he was also like a father to them. After Daniel flees the scene, he drives 3 miles down the road, which was about 10 minutes away, to a small shopping strip off of Broad Rock Boulevard. And here is where he'd walk inside the James food store, which was at the time being operated by a 43-year-old man from Yemen named Abdul Rahman. And I barely know how to pronounce his name, so I will refer to him as Abdul. Daniel then started yelling racist slurs at Abdul, all while in a store full of customers. And like myself, if you were growing up in South Richmond, you definitely visited James food store many a times. So with that said, witnessing a customer curse out the store clerk was regular scheduled program. We were desensitized to drama inside that store, so the customers would have never expected his next move. Daniel, who's now brandishing the same weapon used to kill Derek, points it toward Abdul, demanding cash from the register. While Abdul attempts to do so, Daniel yells more racist slurs toward him, then shoots Abdul point blank range, killing the man. Daniel would then lean over the counter, grab the cash out, and before leaving, he grabs some merchandise from the store as well. And he walks just 1 door down to the poly cleaners. And here's where fate will come back around and meet the 39-year-old man named Jung Do, who testified against Daniel 10 years ago for robbing him inside his store. Upon entering the shop, he would yell racist slurs toward Jung, as he did with Abdul, followed by Daniel blaming him for his conviction, telling Jung, and I quote, "You've been fucking up my life for too long," before firing 1 shot into the man's head. Unbeknownst to Daniel, after shooting Abdul, someone from the food market followed him to warn the other merchants and would catch a front seat view of Daniel shooting Jung in the head. Jung Do was a father of 2 young children and had all the best intentions on coming here for a better life. And said by Abdul co-workers, he worked hard to bring his kids to the United States. Day in and day out, he worked hard for them and little for himself. Both men were adored by the locals, calling them both generous and warm-hearted, and now 2 sets of children would lose a father. Shortly after the shootings, Daniel drove past the crime scene heading west on Broad Rock Boulevard. He would then make a stop in Highland Park to drop off his '87 Lincoln on 5th Avenue and Burns Street. It isn't known if there was a car waiting, a friend, or if he had stolen one, but Daniel's next move was fleeing to Norfolk, Virginia. Something that would confuse authorities later on in the case, because he would return early Thursday morning, which was the next day. Daniel signed in at the Hotel Super 8 on 5110 Williamsburg Road near the Richmond International Airport, paying $152.40 in cash for 3 nights. And this was all while using his own name. Once inside room 320, he would end up barricading himself from the inside. Daniel was apparently unaware he was being watched, so later into the night, he finds himself down in the lobby area arguing with another man, demanding some money from him, prompting someone to stop Daniel, requesting that he return to his room. And this was Daniel's reply: "You're lucky tonight." And after returning to his barricaded room is when police officials made contact. The property had been under surveillance by Richmond and Henrico County Police, as well as the U.S. Marshal Service, for several hours. So now, following a 20-minute negotiation, Daniel was captured in his motel room without incident at about 8:30 p.m., finding a black semi-automatic handgun inside. Police said that more than 700 tips from the public helped a team of investigators arrest Daniel. He was somewhat surprised that no one at the motel called to identify him, whose picture had been broadcasted on television, circulated on the internet, and printed in newspapers, but no one recognized that they were housing a murder fugitive. Now, while wearing a bulletproof vest and a dark-colored sweatsuit, Daniel, who was shackled, smiled and mumbled a song lyric as he was led from Richmond Police Department headquarters into a waiting police van on West Gray Street for the ride to city jail. The city would do something that hadn't been done in years, which was a perp walk for Daniel Bowler. Reporters and bystanders felt Daniel loved the attention of the cameras, saying, and I quote, "It was his prom king moment, his big splash, and he worked it. No ducking or hiding from the lights. He turned his face proudly to the cameras like a professional photo." There was this menacing aura about Daniel that made one young TV reporter shiver a little bit. And in the eyes of those They saw a man who had snapped, given up on life, and reveled in the feeling of everyone knowing what he had done. It seemed you could see a man staring happily into his own grave. At his arraignment, Daniel told the judge he was the devil, and one official would say that he's either crazy or acting crazy. He would be charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges. And during his sentencing, he'd tell the judge and prosecutors, and I quote, "You're next. I'm going to get you." Then outside the courthouse, Chandra Connor, Derek's mother, said she was relieved that Daniel would never be a free man again and would not be able to destroy another family as he did when he killed her son, saying that he should have gotten 100 life sentences, still wanting to know why Daniel even killed Derek Connor and the 2 other men. And these 3 killings would increase Richmond's homicides to 40 for the year in 2005. Daniel's sister Haley wishes she had spent more time helping her brother get his medication, saying that she could have done more and that their family as a whole could have and should have done more. But at the time, nobody thought it could get that bad. If Daniel had been in active state probation or parole, his mental health treatment would have been a key component of merging back into society. Upon his release from the Riverside Regional Jail, Daniel had served all his time and then some. He had paid his debt to society. But if he wanted help with his head, he'd have to wait in line just like everyone else. Daniel desperately needed their help, and because he didn't get it, his lawyers was able to cut a deal with Richmond prosecutors to spare his life. He would still spend the rest of his years behind bars, but the city agreed to pay for his room, board, and medication. Meanwhile, the families of the men he terminated would be serving their own sentences, life without their loved ones. Now, initially, the alleged motive would start to be retaliation from previous history with the victims, to be hate crimes. Although the first 2 victims were robbed, robbery did not appear to be the primary motive, and after finding out the first victim was black, they no longer believed to be hate crimes. But through everything, from the early years until that time, not one official checked his record that would show mental instability. What's my POV of this situation? It could have been avoided. From the moment family, friends, school officials, counselors saw that this boy's personality wasn't the same after having his head thrown headfirst into a windshield, something should have been done way back when. It's just heartbreaking to know that the decisions that a lot of us make every day, we may see it as light, not so serious, not knowing it may cause the deaths of 3 people, changing families' lives forever. But I guess if this doesn't happen, they wouldn't have the notion to make better decisions next time. Point is, somebody will pay the price for somebody else's decision. But rest in peace to the fallen, and y'all stay safe out there. Call me, D.
Hustler talk, no comment though, just paper chase. Chasing my dreams, my nightmares ain't got no money, just a cardboard sign and they existing so bummy. And they want me down with them at the bottom of the barrel. I don't want no parts of it. For that life I never settle, so I go all in that bit, want all my pockets down. I be cool until I yoke the game and make them dig it out. They want me on the corner holding up cardboards, so I go extra hard on the hard flow. They want me on the corner holding up cardboards, so I go extra hard on the hard flow. They want me on the corner holding up cardboards.
Now, if you like to hear a personal story of mine talking about my own battle with depression, self-harm, loss, and how I overcame it, check out this video right here. Love.